I think we'll go ahead and get started. And just a very quick welcome to those of you that are joining us for this site event. Your attendance is much appreciated and recognized. I know that there's a lot happening around the HLPF, a lot of simultaneous events happening all at the same time. It's a very busy week for all of us, so we do very much appreciate your participation and engagement with us here today. So thank you for joining. Just a couple of very quick housekeeping matters before we get started and before I kind of frame the discussion. Just a quick note to say that the meeting will be recorded and we'll share information after for colleagues that weren't able to attend. We will also have simultaneous interpretation in English, Spanish, French, and Arabic. I'm sure many of you used Zoom before. So you can see at the bottom panel of your Zoom interface, you see the globe with that says interpretation. You just simply turn on the channel that you need interpretation for, and it'll come straight into your audio. So thanks again for the translation. The translator's here to help us ensure that colleagues from different backgrounds can understand the discussion. Just to frame things a little bit, I think most of you are here because you work in or are interested in SDG16 or SDG16 plus, as we often refer to it as. I think we're here for many reasons, but we're here to really recognize and discuss, a couple of really important opportunities from the past year, which includes the Rome SDG16 conference, which was graciously hosted by the government of Italy, UNDESA, and IDLO this past May. This was an important opportunity for us as a community to really come together and help identify, where are some of the challenges and some of the gaps. Where are some of the more positive examples of, where progress is being made that we could possibly replicate? And really, what kind of a message are we sending at the international level and to colleagues that work at the national level on what really needs to be done from here? We are nearly at the halfway point to 2030. I think one thing that came from a key message that came from the Rome Civil Society Declaration on SDG16 plus. Basically, this was a civil society declaration and input for the Rome conference directly, but also appeals, I think, much beyond that as well. But this declaration, one of the key messages there is that SDG16 may be in peril. We are at risk of not achieving SDG16 by 2030. I think progress is far off track in many issues and in many countries and contexts. So I think this is a really important opportunity for us to kind of discuss and at the Rome conference and beyond on what needs to happen. And so there are many different strands of conversations happening both at the conference and in follow-up. So we're very grateful to have the organizers of that conference here today with us, and also colleagues who helped put the Rome Declaration together. So with that framing, we'll first hear from our colleagues who actually organized the Rome conference. Again, grateful to Italy, UNDESA, and IDLO for joining us here to give us a bit more insight about what happened at the Rome conference, what comes next from here. So with that, we'll start. I'll hand over to Fabio Cassese, who is the Director General of Italian International Cooperation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Italy. So Fabio, again, thanks once again for joining us. Thanks for hosting us with the Rome conference a couple of months ago. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, John, for organizing together with the whole civil society engaged in the SDG16 plus this side event, that it's very important and very timely after the Rome meeting we had last April. You know, ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, over the last years, we have all sought to keep implementation of SDG16 high on the international agenda. In spite of these very challenging times, we have always believed that a multilateral approach promoting a Pacific and inclusive societies, access to justice, and strong and accountable institutions must drive our actions. The pandemic, of course, we know, has been a stress test for governments and institutions and communities, putting their capacity to provide essential services under pressure. Moreover, the events of the last months, the war in Ukraine, really have shown the extreme relevance of SDG 16 in the current international context, with its goal of peace, justice, and strong institutions. We all know that the pursuit of SDG 16 is pivotal, and it is an enabler of other SDGs. Since the early negotiation of the 2030 agenda, we have in fact been committed to support the need to bridge peace and development through the pillars of good governance, justice, fundamental freedoms, human rights, and the rule of law. Good governance in particular shapes and seals the social pact between people and institutions, an essential step in order to create an environment where the other pillars, justice, rule of law, human rights, and fundamental freedoms, can thrive. Institutions, on the other hand, are fundamental drivers of development. Social conflicts, isolation, inequalities, and exclusion cannot be tackled without good governance, both at local and global levels. So finally, the COVID-19 pandemic has increased the social tensions, inequalities, and corruption, causing polarization, disinformation, and greater difficulties in access to fundamental rights, such as justice. However, no better than the civil society, here represented by the group of SDGs 16 plus, understands and represents the instances of those who face the consequences of social conflicts, of the lack of justice, of the difficulty in accessing to fundamental rights, of an exclusions and inequalities, and also corruption. Your testimony, as well as your actions, can promote a better knowledge of the period we face if our attention fades. Italy, as you said, proudly hosted the SDGs 16 conference together with EDLO and DESA since the first edition. And it became now a consolidated yearly landmark for all those who work in the field of peace building, development, and all the topics involved in SDG 16. During every edition, civil society SDG 16 plus representatives were involved and have expressed through a declaration a very appropriate warning on how, in this challenging time, we need to work together to tackle the challenges of our times. And we were very, very glad to have given SDG 16 plus the space it deserved. Also, as you said in the last meeting, the declaration was very comprehensive, very, very punctual in underlining the main messages we need to deliver in order to implement SDG 16. So we look forward to further discussions with our partners from IDLO and UNDESA in order to organize also in 2023 our conference in always cooperation and dialogue with the civil societies and also other actors involved. So I wish you a very fruitful discussion and thank you for the invitation and good discussion. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Fabio. And again, very much looking forward to continuing this discussion through the Rome conference, and including next year. I think again with that halfway to 2030 milestone, it'd be I think a really important opportunity for us to convene again, really taking a look at what needs to happen in the second half of implementation. So thanks again for your gracious hosting of the conference at this point on a yearly basis. Thanks for joining us. Next, we have Maria Francesco Spada-Lozano, who is the Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs at UNDESA. Francesca, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John, and excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Let me say it's a pleasure to participate in this panel around SDG 16. As you all know, last April we had the third edition of this SDG 16 conference in Rome, and the conference took place obviously in a very challenging global context for SDG 16 and for all of us. In addition to the upheaval created by the COVID-19 pandemic, which we had already in this conference highlighted, new developments, including the invasion of Ukraine, contributed to this challenging context. And we are, in fact, witnessing the largest number of violent conflicts since 1946 in the world, with 1/4 of the global population, 1/4 now living in conflict-affected countries. So let me recall some of the important messages that came out of the conference in April and match them with, or some of them at least, with the findings of our UN 2022 progress report on SDGs. First of all, the role of institutions is crucial. The pandemic has highlighted the importance of effective and efficient public administrations, sound and responsive public institutions, and competent civil servants. COVID-19, in fact, caught governments ill-equipped even in the most developed countries, but it has also shown the capacity of governments and public sector to innovate, even in the context of very limited fiscal space. And second big message is about civil society. The conference emphasized the critical role of participation in all its forms, including women and youth. And securing access to information is a key building block of enhanced participation, and we need to measure this better. The report we have issued about the access of information tells us the following. Access to information laws have been adopted by 135 countries as of 2021. That's not bad, with at least 30 adopting such guarantees since 2015, so for a sufficient long time. However, the implementation of these guarantees could be improved. Out of 91 countries and territories which have access to information laws, only 44% had the data in 2020 on the number of requests for information received, so the actual access, indicating some difficulties faced by public bodies to treat and follow these requests during the pandemic, which may be understandable. If you talk about women and youth, a message was, of course, that it is necessary to elevate the visibility of women in all stages of decision making, including as related to prevention, peace building, and justice, and increase their role in leadership positions, support gender responsive laws and institutions. And for youth, of course, the role of young people as agents of change, peace building, and decision-making process was also well recognized, and we committed to make efforts to provide the space to exercise this agency and empower them to participate. So what do we find in the report? Parliaments, says the report, and their leaders have become younger and more gender diverse in the past 5 years. But you will see the numbers are really moving very slowly. Youth representation, which is considered aged 45 or below, stood at 28.1% in 2018, but climbed to 31.1 in 2021 and dropped slightly to 30.2 in 2022. The proportion of women speakers rose gradually from 17.3 in 2018 to 22% in 2022, yet continues to be below the average of women in parliament. The proportion of women committee chairs fell slightly, but fell. And so in conclusion, male parliamentarians aged 46 and above continue to dominate leadership position in parliaments. And so there is work being done there. Third point, I have only 4 I want to share with you. Third point is policy making. Policy making can make a huge difference, of course, hence the importance of prioritizing coherent policy making across government and public administration. This coherence has been key during the pandemic as they created responses adapted to the emergency, and there is no ready-made policy response in this kind of situations. Conversely, the lack of coordination at the center of government and between ministries has been a key factor in the loss of trust in government, and this is very important when you talk about the SDG 16. So to reverse this dangerous trend, we need to foster effective collaboration for public service delivery based on leadership, transparency, accountability, and effective two-way communication. Fourth, I would like to highlight the role of digitalization. Obviously, there are benefits for in bringing technologies, but also clear risk. Digital government and digital technologies can support improved internal digital systems in public administration and also the delivery of new e-services. But technology in itself is not sufficient. To transform public institutions, we really need a more systemic approach and changes in mindset, adherence to good governance principles, sound management of public resources. So we should also ensure that digital government doesn't infringe on basic freedoms and rights. And one good example, I would say, in the report is about legal identity. By providing all children with proof of legal identity from day one, their rights can be protected and universal access to justice and social services can be enabled. The report says the births of around 1 in 4 children under age 5 worldwide today have never been officially recorded. This is incredible. And only half of the children under 5 in sub-Saharan Africa have had their birth registers. So work to be done. DESA has a very good program and we are trying through our statistical division to help countries do this. I could continue, but I mean, there is leaving no one behind is very important, of course, and accountability, data, but I will conclude with the question of how we communicate about SDG 16, because that might be as important as the substance itself. And this is obviously brings me to the importance of having a vibrant civil society engagement around SDG 16. Engaging with all the SDG 16 plus the stakeholders is key to any progress going forward. I would like to acknowledge your participation, the participation of the civil society during the 2 days of the conference and the work to update the Rome Civil Society Declaration. It provides a very welcome and very useful book for all civil society organizations to contribute to global advancement of SDG 16 at the high-level political forum where we are now and in all other fora. And it also contributes to keeping the visibility of the SDG 16 principles high on the international agenda, as Director General already said, And this is very important, as SDG 16 in all its dimensions is a fundamental underpinning of sustainable development, of delivering on other SDGs. And progress here will be instrumental in shaping the post-pandemic policies and delivery on the plan. And thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Francesca, for those very useful remarks. And I think we could, any one of those issues that you mentioned, we could have an entire hours-long discussion on, and I hope to really continue those discussions in future Rome conferences as well. So thanks very much for helping to frame the issues here today. Next on our list, we have Jan Beagle, who is the Director General of IDLO. Jan, thank you very much for being with us despite the voice challenges. So very much appreciated to have you here. Over to you.
Thank you, John. It's really a pleasure to be here on behalf of the International Development Law Organization. And I have to apologize in advance for my voice. I think on the flight last night between New York and Rome, it disappeared. So I hope it will come back shortly. DG Cassese and ASG's Patolosano have already talked about the important outcomes of our SDG16 conference last April. And I'd really just like to share two overarching themes that stayed with me after that conference, and which I think are relevant to the discussions today. And the first is one of urgency. The consensus from the conference the year before, so in 1921, was that while COVID-19 posed formidable challenges to peace and sustainable development, it also presented a chance to break from the past and break from the inequalities and the injustices of the past and do things in new ways. And we agreed at that time that the world was at a crossroads and that we faced fundamental choices about the type of future that we wanted to build. But unfortunately, 1 year later, we only have to look around us to see that the better angels of our nature seem to be losing out. The impact of the pandemic has been devastating, deepening inequalities and exacerbating fragilities and exposing major trust deficits in governance. And conflict and humanitarian crises are affecting more people than ever before, with women and girls bearing the brunt of their impact. And in the words of the Secretary General, we're at the edge of an abyss and headed in the wrong direction. So as you said, John, SDG 16 is in peril. And we have both a moral duty and an overwhelming self-interest to reverse those trends. But also, as has been said, encouraging glimmers of hope emerged from this year's conference. So my second point is one of cautious optimism and the crucial role of partnerships. Because COVID-19 certainly put societies and institutions to the test. But the conference did show many governments sharing innovative approaches to crisis response and recovery, multilateral institutions highlighting frameworks to prevent conflict and sustain peace, to combat corruption and to address inequalities, young leaders demonstrating the importance of empowering youth networks and directing policy to serve their special needs, and civil society in particular, showcasing good practices at the community level, from resolving disputes and fighting corruption to ensuring the integrity of public information. And we were very pleased that 270 civil society organizations came together to adopt the renewed Rome Civil Society Declaration on SDG 16 Plus. And last week at HLPF, I chaired a session on SDG 17. And in that session, I highlighted the promising outcomes from the conference and the Civil Society Declaration, because I believe that declaration is a testament to the contribution of civil society mobilization and tireless work on the ground to champion peace, justice, and the rule of law. And it contains many important messages and can be a reference point for us all. So it is this type of enthusiasm and energy that we must carry forward. And IDLO is proud to be part of the movement for more peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. We encourage member states to prioritize good governance, to empower citizens to participate in decision-making, and build resilient institutions that deliver for people. We encourage international development partners to increase financing for justice, the rule of law, and good governance. And we pledge to partner with civil society to help safeguard commitments and progress towards SDG 16 around the world. And as Solisano just said, to communicate. I think that is extremely important point. We have no time to lose. We must act together. And we believe that it is the best investment we can make in our collective future. Thank you very much, John.
Thanks, Jan, for joining us, and for those really insightful remarks. I really like your framing of everything. The urgency, that's one part of it, but the cautious optimism, I think that's great. And I think all of us here are in many ways optimists. I think you have to be an optimist in order to work on these issues. There's many daunting challenges that we face, but we work on this because we're optimistic that things can change. So thanks again for IDLO's support as always. So now turning to our colleague, Charlotte Kurting, who is a program officer at the Civil Society Platform for Peace Building and State Building, one of the colleagues who helped in coordinating the Rome Declaration with TAP Network and Namati and DPAC and Civicus. So Charlotte, over to you to give us a little bit of insight about the Rome Declaration and our engagement with the Rome Conference. Over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you, John. I'd like to give a brief overview of the process of writing and launching the Rome Declaration. So first of all, you might know that this is not the first Rome Declaration. In 2019, when SDG 16 was reviewed for the first time at HLPF, we brought civil society together in order to produce the very first Rome Civil Society Declaration on SDG 16+. In 2021, we convened inputs and recommendations again in order to provide an update to the Rome Declaration by acknowledging how COVID-19 has slowed down progress on SDG 16. And in 2022, we have been observing that it has not only slowed down, but there's actually been a backsliding on the implementation process of targets towards peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. So SDG 16 is in peril. And because we consider SDG 16 as the enabler of the entire 2030 agenda, this is really worrying. And as my co-panelists underlined, we are faced with geopolitical developments that endanger government's willingness to invest in peace building and conflict prevention and in justice. This crisis, and we are not only speaking about Ukraine, have been diverting vital resources towards greater militarization and shrinking civic spaces. Based upon this assessment, we decided to gather yet again large networks of civil society in order to produce the 2022 Rome Declaration, which we have presented a few months ago at the Rome Conference in April, and which we're referring to today. So in order to write this strong advocacy paper, we at CSPPS, along with our colleagues at the TAP Network, Namati, Civicus, and JPAC, have organized a large consultation process over the months of March and April before the Rome Conference. This process included first a comprehensive online survey shared with our networks and partners, and secondly, a virtual workshop with breakout groups focusing on specific areas of SDG 16 that seemed most important to civil society actors and organizations. Based upon those various inputs and recommendations brought from a large variety of contexts, we were able to draft the Rome Declaration. At the Rome Conference, we were very pleased to be able to share the 2022 Rome Declaration with stakeholders present. So I would like to also briefly give you an overview of some key recommendations that you can find in more detail in the declaration itself. These include protecting civic space, preserving peace and security in order to keep multilateralism alive, strengthening data, monitoring, and accountability for SDG 16+, and linked to all of those recommendations, enhancing multi-stakeholders partnerships and making sure that civil society is included in a meaningful way in the implementation process of SDG 16. Spaces like the Rome Conference are important for civil society to express its observations and concerns when it comes to the 2030 agenda. And linked to this, we recommend going further and enhancing the capacity of civil society organizations so that they can actively contribute towards SDG 16 with their own actions, but also through their traditional activities, such as raising awareness of the population on SDGs, sharing reports and analysis with policymakers, and infuse policymaking processes. Finally, taking stock of the alarming picture that we are observing when it comes to the implementation of SDG 16 and the entire agenda, civil society recommends keeping our hopes up and scaling up commitments and investments around the 2023 moments. That is the SDG Summit and the Summit of the Future. So I'm really happy to be joined also today by our other colleagues from civil society, so they will be able to present how they work on SDG 16 in order to ground the Rome Declaration in their context and reality. Thank you very much, John.
Thanks very much, Charlotte, for that useful overview of the Rome Declaration. I think there's a lot to unpack. We could have, gone on and on about, the recommendations addressing a lot of the challenges that we had identified. So I'd really encourage colleagues to really unpack it again, and as Charlotte mentioned, really see how you can contextualize these issues and how to take some of these recommendations forward on your own. And so we'll put a link in the chat box for colleagues to find more about the Rome Declaration and also the Rome Conference as well. I would really encourage those of you here to unpack it a bit further in your own spare time as well. So thanks, Charlotte. So now going back to the point that Francesca had made about communications, I think we're going to try a little bit of a communications exercise, use a visual tool to help us engage, identify where we all on this call at least feel the main challenges and gaps are when it comes to SDG 16 plus. So we'll use the Mentimeter. I'm sure many of you have used this before. You can see here just in front of you, to use this platform, you just go to www.menti.com on your phone or web browser. It'll ask you to enter the code here, or you can use the QR code right here. Enter that code in the website, and it'll bring you to a platform where, again, we'll ask you to share what you feel are 3 key words in your view on what represents the biggest challenges and gaps. So you should see in front of you now, if you're logged into the platform, a prompt for 3 words. And essentially what will come up here, we'll see a word cloud, which will basically reflect your inputs in real time right here in front of us. I'm actually going to do this too. I have fun with these kinds of things. So I'll abuse my moderator privileges and put my 3 words in here as well.
We need the code again. Sorry. Oh, it's in the, I see, in the chat box.
Yep, it's in the chat box, the code, and it's also at the top of the screen as well. So we had our first input, finance. Big, bold letters, we need finance. Finance and resources, okay. Political will, trust. I think a lot of these issues intertwined with one another. We always talk about the integrated nature of SDG 16. I think many of us find, in our own work that political will and trust and partnership, civic space are all intertwined. We'll maybe give it 1 more minute for you all to fill in your challenges and gaps. Right, trust, political will seems to be a hot button issue. Corruption, finance, coordination, capacity, rule of law, civil society voice, interlinkages. I think these are great. I think here we have front and center political will, though. I think that's one thing we identified in the Rome Declaration as one of the bigger gaps. Obviously, backsliding progress is largely due to a lack of political will from governments. Maybe we'll give it just about 30 more seconds here. See, resources and finance, also another issue that we had discussed. One thing actually I might mention just from the Rome Declaration itself, one of the recommendations was to establish a global SDG16 plus fund, basically an opportunity for donors to come together to ensure that not only SDG16 is addressed by donors in a holistic manner, but also to help colleagues from the grassroots level, civil society, in accessing funding, because that is a huge gap for us from the civil society side, is that often resources don't make their way down to grassroots groups that need that support the most. And I think that was one of the things we also discussed in the context of the Rome conference itself. So great, thanks everyone for your inputs. I think all of those issues, again, I think the organizers of the conference here might recognize a lot of those issues. They were, I think, thoroughly addressed in the discussions that we've had in the context of the Rome Declaration, and surely, something for us to consider, in future organizing of the Rome conference in the future. So I want to just take a quick moment and hand it back over to our panelists here, just for very brief reflections from all of you on some of those priorities that we saw from that word cloud. Maybe a brief intervention in the form of a tweet, if you can, just summarize your thoughts and reflections on some of the things that we saw through the word cloud. So I'll hand it over to you, Fabio, first. Any reflections from that word cloud that we just saw?
Sorry. No, very interesting. Congratulations. There were a lot of inputs. Just in a tweet, I think 3 of them are quite relevant in my first perception. The first one is a political will. I think it's very important, because without political will, it's very, very difficult to implement this SDG. And unfortunately, the strength of the communities, the civil society, is not sufficient. Second is trust, consequently, because we build open, equal societies, good governance based on trust between citizens and institutions. And third is women, because I think that the full involvement of women in all the governance processes is fundamental to really change the approach. And so we need to bring more women in all these processes. Access to justice, we know everything. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Fabio. And over to you, Francesca, your thoughts.
Yes, thank you. I think trust, as Fabio said, is really fundamental. And I would like to highlight how this is a core element of the vision of the Secretary General in his recent report called Our Common Agenda. He speaks about a more open, more multi-stakeholder multilateralism, and the UN being, progressively more inclusive of other elements of the society, because trust and the new social contract are at the basis of progress and peaceful societies. So I think it all comes back to the core ideas behind SDG 16. And I would add that next year is very important for SDG 16, because we have both the HLPF, the in-depth discussion of SDG 16, and then the Summit of the Future, where all the vision of the Secretary General will be more elaborated and possibly subscribed to. So I think next year is a very important one for our work, and I encourage you to all participate and contribute. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Francesca. Jan, any thoughts on your side?
Yes, well, I cannot just agree more about political will and trust. They were the first two words that I wrote down. I also believe that the issue of resourcing is important. I think that both national governments and development partners must put more resources into good governance, or we are not going to see the change. I believe that also the communication that was mentioned is very important, I think, for all of us, wherever we sit, whether we sit in national governments, in multilateral institutions, in civil society, we need to do better in communicating. And I think that Charlotte had it right when she said we have to keep our hopes up. But at the same time, I think we really have to work together in those multi-stakeholder partnerships to really make it happen. And next year, as others have said, will be the crucial year, and we need to have a very strong showing for SDG 16. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks a lot, Jan. And Charlotte, any thoughts on your side?
Yeah, I think on political will and trust as well. Trust cannot be built without governments making sure that there is space for civil society to raise its voices, and also civil society, with their space that it's given, can raise awareness of the communities and of the population, so that those communities can take ownership of how SDGs are implemented in their own context, and in turn infuse policymaking processes so that they trust the processes that they have reflected on and shared their observations on. So I think it relates to really making sure there is enough civic space for that to happen. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. And this is a great segue into the next session that we have. It's been great to hear from our colleagues, particularly working at the global level and around the Rome Conference and the Rome Declaration. I think it's important for us to have these opportunities to really identify where we are and where we need to go. So once again, thanks to the organizers of the Rome Conference and the Rome Declaration. But the next question really is about, as Charlotte mentioned previously, is how do we ensure that these conversations, the priorities that we know we need to address, how do we make sure that those are localized? How do we make sure that the political will is there from governments, but also how does civil society help to ensure that localization and ownership at the national level and at the grassroots level? So we're very delighted to have our colleagues, a few colleagues from the national and local level from civil society here with us today to really help unpack what needs to happen, the experiences of colleagues at the local level, and kind of contextualizing that in the whole context of the Rome Declaration and the issues identified from the Rome Conference. So with that, we'll hand over to Jerthy Mayo-Anda from ELAC in the Philippines, just to share a little bit about your experiences in the Philippines, your work around SDG 16 plus, and maybe some reflections on why the SDG or what elements of the Rome Declaration are most relevant in your view. In your context. So Jerthy, over to you.
Yes, good evening from the Philippines. Good morning and good afternoon to all our colleagues wherever you are. Thank you, John. Thank you for all the organizers. The Philippines, as everyone knows, is a small country, but very beautiful, rich in biodiversity, but facing a lot of governance challenges. And while we have a good constitution and we do have a lot of laws that seek to protect human rights and environmental justice, the challenge has always been implementing these laws, because laws are only as good as their implementation. And in our effort to make sure that SDG 16 is alive and localized, our group, the Environmental Legal Assistance Center, is part of a network of public interest law groups called alternative law groups. And we have done our share of enlightening and enhancing capacity of our community partners, indigenous peoples, fisherfolk, farmers, women, and youth about their rights and about the role of civil society in shaping governance, in making sure that these laws are implemented, in exacting accountability. So for instance, currently I'm in Southern Palawan, which is the Philippines or the country's last bastion of biodiversity, and the community partners we have been engaging with are battling with extractive projects like mining inside the protected areas, the ancestral domain. So how do you make sure that their voices are heard and that they can participate? So that means asserting the right to free and prior informed consent. So that's part of the process. And then second is also sustaining those initiatives. And it's not just simply talking about rights and remedies, but making sure that their knowledge and skills are being applied so they can really participate in drafting development plans, in questioning certain issues that probably will be contrary to law. Now, we believe that the SDG16, the Rome Declaration, has to be supported. And I'd like to make a pitch to finance, because the Legal Empowerment Fund that has already been identified needs to actually be more secured and needs to be supported further, because the efforts that we do in the local level really requires a lot of, warm bodies, time, and also funds. And it's not easy to just organize and do trainings or do advocacy work without these considerations in place. So when we do, example, participate in a local development council or a protected area management board or any multi-sectoral body, we take into account capacity, finance, and also sustaining these efforts. Only then can we shape good governance and make sure that SDG16 is alive, localized, alive and kicking. So I would like to say, mabuhay from the Philippines.
Great, thanks very much, Cynthia. I think it's really important to think also, as you mentioned, how we actually bring this down to the local level and make an impact. I think we often think of, especially engaging around the UN, we think of national governments as, the primary duty bearers, of course, but a lot of people experience, service delivery, for example, at the local level. I think it's really important to localize this agenda at all levels, especially the local level. So thanks for your work in the Philippines, Jyoti. Next, I'll hand it over to Natalia Echegoyen-Berry, who is with ACIG in Argentina. Natalia will also provide her remarks in Spanish. So for those of you that need translation, just a reminder that interpretation is available again on the bottom bar of your Zoom interface. So Natalia, over to you, please.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias por la invitación. Celebro este espacio, me parece muy importante. También felicito a los colegas y colegas que hablaron anteriormente y a todos los participantes de este evento. La verdad que comparto, coincido también con el optimismo, pero también con lo que mencionaron y describieron, que son los principales problemas tanto de acceso a la justicia como de salud en el contexto de pandemia y pospandemia. Y también me parece importante, digamos, los puntos que señalaron en relación a la importancia del empoderamiento y de la participación activa de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil. Básicamente, la Declaración de Roma creo que tiene muchas fortalezas. Felicito, digamos, tanto por el proceso como por la elaboración, pero sobre todo por la oportunidad de poder formular y revisar esta declaración con las nuevas problemáticas. Me parece que algo que tiene la declaración, que no solamente es una declaración, sino que establece el cómo enfrentar estos problemas, ¿no? Y da un camino, que eso muchas veces nos olvidamos, ¿no? de establecer no solamente una identificación clara de problemas, sino también generar recomendaciones específicas para poder accionar. Y me parece que eso es algo de las fortalezas también que tiene la declaración, frente a un escenario donde, como mencionó Jen, está en peligro el cumplimiento de los ODS en general y en particular el ODS 16, que es una llave para el ejercicio de los otros derechos. En este contexto de securitización de la salud pública, de reducción del espacio cívico, de debilitamiento de las instituciones del Estado, del uso geopolítico del acceso a recursos críticos en salud, como mostró la pandemia, frente también al diagnóstico que hace la Declaración de Roma de un fracaso de la comunidad internacional y de los gobiernos en brindar respuestas oportunas, eficientes, eficaces, y por sobre todo equitativa para los grupos vulnerabilizados, ¿no? En este marco de retrocesos, me parece que generar estos espacios de reflexión son súper valiosos. Me parece que la oportunidad de incidir que tiene la declaración frente a la rendición de cuentas que tienen que hacer los estados, me parece una oportunidad. Contiene propuestas sólidas, sobre todo en relación al apoyo directo a los actores locales de la sociedad civil, a las prioridades de protección también que establece en relación a los defensores ambientales. En Latinoamérica es gravísima la situación de muertes y de hostigamiento hacia los defensores ambientales. Un gran avance que tenemos es el acuerdo de Escazú, pero tenemos que es una prioridad en Latinoamérica. Garantizar también, como señala la declaración, la independencia del periodismo y la libertad de expresión, pero justamente aborda la declaración, y eso me parece súper importante, los discursos del odio y la mala información o la información inexacta que generó tantos problemas durante la pandemia, ¿no? En contextos críticos. También me parece que un punto a resaltar es el fortalecimiento de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, en tanto el financiamiento, pero también, no solamente financiamiento, sino potenciar todo tipo de asociaciones, fomentar proyectos eficaces, y básicamente también me parece que un punto central de la declaración habla de la necesidad de un multilateralismo inclusivo. Necesitamos establecer estos puntos focales de la sociedad civil en las instituciones multilaterales, ¿no? Quienes trabajamos territorialmente, quienes trabajamos en materia de acceso a la justicia, con grupos vulnerabilizados, sabemos que necesitamos tener un espacio de participación no solamente consultiva, no solamente, sino poder participar en todo el ciclo de la elaboración e implementación de políticas públicas que tiendan a revertir el grave problema que hay. Me parece que la declaración también brinda enfoques integrales, brinda una respuesta global ante el COVID, o quiere, digamos, insta a esta respuesta global que necesitamos integrada, articulada. Justamente me parece que un punto que trae son las cuestiones, y eso sí es innovador en una declaración vinculada al acceso a la justicia y vinculada a los ODS, que traiga el debate de cambio climático, que traiga el debate del campo sanitario también de distribución justa de vacunas y atención prioritaria. ¿Por qué? Porque si no, ese debate se está dando en los ámbitos económicos, ¿no? Actores económicos están definiendo las agendas prioritarias de los países. Entonces es importante traer ese debate al campo de los organismos y con este multilateralismo inclusivo de la sociedad civil, pero también de todos los grupos vulnerabilizados, que es la perspectiva también que incorpora con mucho acierto la declaración. Y me parece que esto, promover la consulta y el consentimiento previo de las comunidades y garantizarlo y estar detrás de eso es un punto importante. Reforzar el tema de datos, de rendición de cuentas, la participación de la sociedad civil justamente en la medición del progreso de los ODS, la alfabetización en temas de datos, la participación ciudadana. Me parece que algo importante también a destacar es que justamente interpela no solamente a los estados, sino también a la comunidad internacional, y me parece que la perspectiva que trae también es al sector privado, ¿no? Con esta perspectiva de empresas y derechos humanos, un comportamiento ético del sector privado, ¿no? Que hemos visto que el complejo médico, fármaco, industrial ha tenido tantas graves consecuencias en el contexto de pandemia. Así que me parece que integra estas nuevas perspectivas de grupos vulnerabilizados, de empresas y de derechos humanos, del empoderamiento comunitario que salió justamente en esta consulta que hicimos, y pone el foco en la construcción de resiliencia, que la resiliencia nunca es una resiliencia individual, sino que es comunitaria, es colectiva, y para eso se requieren proyectos sólidos territoriales, con este enfoque de grupos vulnerabilizados que la declaración me parece que con mucho acierto nos trae, y trae esta intersección tan importante entre salud, cambio climático, y sobre todo la intersección con otros ODS, que eso me parece que es un gran acierto. Solamente y con esto ya termino para no llevar más tiempo, nosotros hemos estado trabajando de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, básicamente en la pandemia, en grandes redes, ¿no? Estamos promoviendo en este momento también el camino hacia un acuerdo regional en materia de acceso a la justicia, donde pueden estar plasmadas las principales acciones que los estados deberían hacer para revertir las principales barreras que pesan sobre los grupos vulnerabilizados. Y hemos estado con organizaciones también produciendo información que han sido tomadas por los relatores de derechos humanos, vinculadas a la grave situación de acceso a la justicia durante la pandemia, y hemos hecho un estudio regional en 17 países, junto con CEJA, de la OEA, con De Justicia de Colombia, con FIMA de Chile, con la VA de Brasil, con la Red de Empoderamiento Jurídico y con DPLF, para reportar la situación que estaban viviendo los grupos vulnerabilizados en materia de acceso a la justicia desde la perspectiva de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil. Y también generamos distintas instancias y distintas redes también, por ejemplo, de abogacía comunitaria en nuestro país, una red federal que en este momento ya tiene más de 120 abogados y abogadas y organizaciones de todo el país, para justamente trabajar con este enfoque intercultural, interseccional, con perspectiva de derechos humanos, y para tratar de dar un enfoque diferente a lo que es el ejercicio de derechos y para avanzar en la supresión de barreras. También hemos generado informes temáticos en relación a la reforma de la justicia, en relación a los servicios esenciales, y colocar a la justicia como un servicio esencial que no podía parar, y sin embargo durante la pandemia hemos visto que no fue considerado un servicio esencial, y que se brindaron solamente prestaciones mínimas con mucha inseguridad jurídica. También hemos generado informes y hemos participado en la generación de informes y estudios de casos sobre la participación de las mujeres en los sistemas de justicia en América Latina, y creemos que eso es importante porque necesitamos una justicia con perspectiva de género, necesitamos una justicia que pueda dar cuenta de la diversidad en todos sus aspectos. Entonces nos parecía importante la generación de estudios, de información. Hemos generado también un libro sobre las experiencias de empoderamiento jurídico en Latinoamérica, también cómo el empoderamiento nos puede servir para revertir las grandes brechas de segregación socioespacial en las ciudades de Latinoamérica. Hemos hecho siempre todo este trabajo, lo hacemos con otros, generamos también plataformas para ejercer derechos, sobre todo para los grupos más vulnerabilizados, como una plataforma de discapacidad y derechos que hemos trabajado para que las personas puedan conocer, usar y transformar el derecho, y que los mismos grupos vulnerabilizados puedan generar y ser un insumo para la elaboración de las políticas públicas en materia de género. Bueno, hasta acá dejo para no seguir, creo que hablé muy rápido, pero bueno, estoy disponible y voy a poner también el mail para pasarle también toda la información sobre los trabajos que venimos haciendo, y muchas gracias nuevamente a todas y todos.
Great, thanks very much, Natalia. I won't try and summarize all of the issues that you've covered. I mean, I think it just points to the many challenges that we face and the many dimensions of our work that need to be further strengthened, especially on the civil society side. So thank you very much, Natalia. Next, we have Margaret Olabisi Mukwuye, who is from the Civil Society Coalition for Sustainable Development in Nigeria. So please, Bisi, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Olabisi Mukwuye. I'm from Nigeria, and I'm representing the Civil Society Coalition on Sustainable Development, CSCSD. That's the acronym of our organization. And we are a coalition of about 2,000 NGOs that are spread in all the geopolitical zones of my country, Nigeria, except in some areas in the northern parts of Nigeria, where we are hindered by insurgency. And right now, I'm joining you from the United Nations High-Level Political Forum on the SDGs in New York. Prior to 2002 and within this year, TAP Network and other partners have provided opportunities for us, for civil society organizations to engage in order to further update the 2022 Rome Declaration. As we have all witnessed for the past 10 years, about 2 or 3 years now, TAP Network and other partners have provided opportunities for us to further update the 2022 Rome Declaration. As we have witnessed, SDG16 Plus and all the other goals have been affected by problems, as has been mentioned by so many of my colleagues on this platform. But that has not hindered us, because on the 6th of April, TAP and partners organized an interactive workshop to further gather information to amplify the SDGs implementation. We also had a survey, and also we shared experiences at the Rome conference in April. Yes, in April. And some of the recommendations are actually our practical experiences that we are feeling all over the world, especially in our country, Nigeria. So the importance of the Rome Civil Society Declaration on SDG16, especially the aspects of the declaration that speaks to my country, are both at the national and the local level. And I'll identify some of them as a capacity gap and funding issues, which is also a challenge to the enhancement and implementation of SDG16 Plus. We know in my country, Nigeria, that we have issues of insurgency, and the funds that are supposed to be channeled to development are distracted and are channeled to buying arms and ammunition. So funds for development in my country are competing with funds for Boko Haram and all the insurgencies. And talking about funding, our organization has received support from TAP that has provided us opportunity to organize training for our members. We just completed a national workshop in Ibadan about 3 months ago, and we are presently stepping down those trainings at the subnational level. It is important for us that our members understand the interlinkages of SDG16 and other SDGs for greater impact. And this will help to strengthen members' capacity to gather and analyze data, as well as to craft standard and adaptable, usable reports as a tool for SDG monitoring and accountability. And those are areas that we add value for our members. Part of the materials that we produce at that training and that workshop, the support for TAP, is this that I have in my hand. And then we also have, we can also talk about issues of human rights and shrinking civic space. We know that multi-stakeholder partnership is key to the 230 agenda. Unfortunately, violence and conflict has continued to be a challenge that our country is battling with at this moment. As I said, budgets that are meant for infrastructure and safety nets are channeled to purchase arms and ammunition. Political will has been mentioned severally on this platform. Commitments by government too has been mentioned. In our presentation last week at the HLPF, we called on governments to make next year's 2020-23 summit a commitment summit. And we demand that governments must come to next year's summit with concrete and ambitious commitments that will catalyze progress to the implementation of the SDGs. Data, as we all know, is key to development. We cannot overemphasize this. We advocate that data should be disaggregated, it should be timely, and it should be reliable. And talking about data, some countries, maybe some in the global south, I don't know how it is in the other areas, do not take cognizance of data that are generated by civil society organizations. More often than not, data generated by us are sometimes regarded as unofficial data, which is detrimental to development. So strengthening data is key to monitoring and accountability for the SDG16. COVID-19 challenge. We can continue to talk about this, but the pandemic has almost reversed the achievements of the global agenda. But the time that to build back better, and we have continued to talk about vaccine equality that should be taken care of, and this should be done by the production and fair distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. We are all aware that in a bid to achieve data vaccine equality, the World Health Organization selected some African countries, my country being one of them. They were included in order for us to receive technology needed to produce the mRNA vaccines on the continent. And we are lucky in Nigeria, the COVID-19 pandemic did not ravage our country the way it ravaged other countries. I want to say that in my final submission that our organization has continued to partner with government through the office of the Special Advisor to our President on the SDGs. We call it OSAP, where some of our members engage with governments. We engage with the private sector, academia, and all that are contributing to development. Next year, 2023, Nigeria will be presenting at the VNR, and we are demanding and we will engage Nigerian governments to be committed, because without a focus on the SDG16 plus targets, which are for peace, justice, and inclusion, none of the sustainable development goals will be able to be delivered in full. And we don't want the SDGs to be doomed. We know that with peace, that will be achievable. But without peace, there cannot be sustainable development. Thank you for this opportunity to engage. Over to you, John.
Great, thanks very much, BZ. And I think CSCSD is a really great example of a national CSO coalition working around the SDGs, and our work with you establishing SDG16 plus clubs, I think, is a great example for us to see how to replicate and mobilize communities within civil society. So again, thanks for your great work and a great example to replicate. So over to our final speaker, we have Musa Asumana Soko from WashNet YPPD based in Sierra Leone. So please, Musa, over to you for your reflections.
Thank you very much, John, and hello everyone. I work in Sierra Leone being a post-conflict country, emerging from war, grappling with the aftermath of environmental destructions as well as health emergencies. We talk about cholera, you recently talked about Ebola, and now we're all talking about the global pandemic, COVID-19. So being a country on a crossroads, it has had very complex political systems. A small country having well over 16 registered political parties, making governance even more complex to manage and to match the daily realities of citizens' aspiration to what should be delivered. It is also a country that has grappled in the course of the pandemic, with issues of justice, the rule of law, and accountability. So when you, for example, look, how we feel very much important about the Rome Civil Society Declaration is the fact that it resonates very clearly to these realities at the ground level. And particularly when you look at the renewed call for urgency and the call for action, ensuring, that we empower individuals, as well as, making sure that, there is this wholesome recovery process, that includes everyone, regardless where they are. We have also seen this as an opportunity to equally leverage on the people-centered approach, in meeting the sustainable development goals, which interestingly, has also built more critically into other ongoing national processes involving civil society and its interface with state institutions and government generally. The other aspect of the Rome Civil Society Declaration that we also have seen very important to our context is the aspect of promoting meaningful inclusion and participation of civil society or people generally, regardless where they are, as well as using the whole of society approach. So for example, in my context, where we have introduced as a country the civil society and government dialogue series, which provides civil society and government to interface and be able to have the opportunity of asking very critical questions around inequality, justice, governance issues generally around essential services, and issues of fragility and peace building. So this is where civil societies, for example, will have a day before the actual event of the interface to synthesize their responses, their questions to government. And once it comes to the interface process, they have representatives to be asking these questions to government and requiring answers to these. So this is stemming from the aspect of building trust, ensuring that citizens are having trust in their own systems of governance or their own institutions of governance. The other is the aspect of ensuring, there is this robust partnership, between civil society and government. When I say civil society, we also look at the international non-governmental organizations. Like, for example, when the Youth Partnership for Peace and Development was approached by CORDAID, through the Global Office, to be able to work with the country office here in Sierra Leone to implement the Inclusive Conflict Prevention and Peace Building Project. The partnership there is with a fund from the UN Peace Building Fund. We have closely worked with governments to be able to drive the project, as well as having the first ever National Youth Conflict Prevention Summit, bringing together well over 500 organizations and young people across Sierra Leone's 16 districts. So this emphasizes on the need for collaborative partnerships, as well as enabling the space for organizations and civil society to be able to thrive and be able to reach the last miles for people, regardless where they are. We have seen equally how government has been committed to working with civil society in reviewing the National Development Cooperation Framework. So this has been one area a lot of rancor has emerged over time, especially with the increase, in threats or the feeling of threat, as well as the shrinking civic spaces, as to how civil society have been feeling that their spaces are getting dwindled because of the draconian systems and policies that government is instituting, to their existence. So civil societies have been provided this opportunity to be able to look at what is it they want to see in the development cooperation framework, what measures of accountability would they want to see, what is accountability in their own lens, and that kind of thing. So even though we cannot say it's a blueprint process for now, but this has been a significant roadmap going forward, to be able to ensure, that civil societies are provided with the space to be able to influence their own processes. We already operate in a very uncertain landscape where funding limitations, are heightening. We are having organizations folding operations because they no longer could afford office rents, to get their operations or equally their advocacies up. We are having situations where civil society partners, are being imprisoned because of the voices that they provide, on very critical state matters. So what we are doing now as the WashNet is managing 97 member institutions across the country. what we are doing as the part of the Health Accountability Consortium, working with the Budget Advocacy Network, Health Alert, and WashNet through funding from the Open Society Initiative for West Africa. We are now training civil society starting tomorrow and ending on Saturday on how we can fundraise in the context of COVID-19 and the shrinking civic spaces. So if, for example, you're seeing this directory that we have just put together, this is one of the directories to be able to ensure that we build grassroots civil society capacities, on fundraising, as well as ensuring institutional sustainability beyond the current spaces that are being limited by either the availability of resources or by state institutions. So this is delivered jointly with the Open Society Foundations through the West African office to be able to ensure that we get civil society.
Musa, sorry to interrupt, but your audio is there's a background noise from your audio. So we can't really hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Okay, yep. And if you could just wrap up your remarks.
Okay, so I'll just take off the earphone. Okay, so as I conclude, this is just to point to the reality at hand that the Rome Civil Society Declaration has been a clear roadmap, for civil society to be able to invigorate their actions, because spaces, gets to change over time. We must be able to also have very concrete tools to be able to leverage on going forward, ensuring that civil societies are not only provided with a voice, the tools to be able to engage, but equally the opportunities to be able to influence the change process. So we believe that the IDLO and the United Nations provided that very unique space, to clearly look at the Rome civil society process as one golden instrument for civil society, especially for civil societies operating in the global south, where fragility, conflict, and violence are very eminent. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much, Musa, and to all of our colleagues for sharing their experiences and reflections on the Rome Declaration, on their experiences, what needs to happen, and also highlighting some of the great work that's already being done by many of you and others. So thanks again for sharing your experiences. We are past time at the moment. We ran a little bit over, but we wanted to still do one final exercise with all of you. I think reflecting on, again, a lot of the things that need to happen. We've talked about many, many challenges today throughout this discussion. We'll do another Mentimeter here, so you can find the information here on the screen. The code is also in the chat box as well. But basically, we really want to unpack from all of you, also thinking about next steps on our side with the Rome Declaration, around the question of, what is needed from all of us, the international community working on the SDGs, what is needed to actually ensure that there's more effective action towards SDG 16 plus. Again, we've talked a lot about the challenges and what we need to do, but now I think it's great to hear from all of you on what you think we need to do collectively in order to move and catalyze additional or better progress on SDG 16 plus. So here, again, you just put your thoughts in here. We won't have time for reflections from the panelists, but I think this is a really important for us to think about what we also need to address in next year, and the next year engaging around the Rome Declaration. So this will help inform some of our discussions going forward as a group and with many of you here. So if you can, we'll share, you can see on the screen some of the responses, but I might also just, as people are providing their thoughts on Mentimeter, I see that there were some inputs on the chat box that I might just read out as we wait for people to provide reflections. I think some echoes of women in Africa. Access to justice is increasingly difficult in developing nations. SDG 16 provide leeway to reduce violence against women and domestic violence, sexual and gender-based violence. 7 years after, how do we make countries accountable? And that's a key question for us when it comes to the Rome Declaration, especially going forward, is how do we use that to actually hold governments accountable? How do we work with some of the colleagues here and otherwise to hold their governments accountable? I think it's a great question for us to consider in terms of our future work. I think another colleague, it says, we should be mindful of the needs of groups of people who are often outside of mainstream civil society, thinking particularly of Indigenous peoples whose voices are rarely heard. So I think this is another great point of just for reflection from all of us. I'm thinking about how do we engage with other communities, especially those that are most marginalized and often left behind. So I think also another really good point and interesting, consideration for us going forward. There was a comment about women peace builders, how to call peace and reconciliation on the table. I think using women peace builders, social cohesion, interreligious communities. I think it's another great point for us to consider. And I think just going to the reflections here on the Mentimeter, I mean, there is, I think just reading it just right now, I think there's some really great inputs, the need to coordinate, with national groups and governments, maybe also hinting towards that accountability relationship, support for local SDG 16 plus champions. I think we've heard a lot of experiences with that today. Sharing best practices, increased funding, more space for civil society, funding again, bolstering political will. I think there's a lot of strands within this that we have plans for in terms of next steps for the Rome Declaration. We mentioned that 2023 will be a key mobilizing moment for us. I mean, recognizing that it's the halfway moment to 2030. I think this is an important opportunity for us, again, to come with this message to say that, the dire need for action is beyond us. I mean, we need action now. We're backsliding on progress. It's as urgent as it's ever been before. And maybe we even shift our focus to a more, towards accountability, as opposed to, here's what needs to happen. With our recommendations, maybe we then shift our focus towards a more, I guess you could say, confrontational or accountability approach. So I think these inputs are really helpful for us. On top of that, again, just in terms of next steps, we'll, as the facilitators of the Rome Declaration discussions, we will also follow up with all of you that have endorsed the Rome Declaration around next steps on our advocacy for the Rome Declaration, including around the 2023 discussions. So if just one final point, for those of you that have not already endorsed the Rome Declaration, we would really, really encourage you to do so. Obviously, the more support we get for things like this, the better and the stronger collective voice we have. So that's the first benefit. But also, again, we will have much more to follow from our discussions here around what we do with this Rome Declaration from here. And we will share all of that information with all of the organizations who have endorsed the declaration going forward. So please, if you haven't already endorsed the declaration, we will send more information on how you can do that after this call. So I just want to say thank you once again to the speakers that we had in this second session in particular. I think what we've seen here is that there's a lot that needs to happen. But I mean, again, going back to a point that Jan Beagle from IDLO made before, there is this urgency, absolutely, and the Rome Declaration highlights that, and we've heard that message over and over today. But I think there's also room for cautious optimism as well. I think because of the leadership of civil society and the leadership of many of you that we've heard from today, and those that we haven't, those that are here in attendance, the great work that we all do from the global to national to local grassroots levels, I think is hugely important for helping us. And again, we heard, needing to have hope. I think it's a huge reason for us to be hopeful, to be cautiously optimistic, but again, highlighting that the leadership role that civil society is taking, we need to hold governments accountable because we are clearly doing our part as civil society. It's time for governments to step up and do the same. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. I know there's a lot happening at the HLPF. We'll be in touch from here again with more information about the Rome Declaration, how you can endorse it, along with some clarity on next steps on how we can bring this forward in our advocacy around the 2023 moments next year. So thanks again to everyone. Thanks also to the interpreters for their hard work as always. And we look forward to engaging with all of you much more from this going forward. So thanks again, everyone.
Bye.